Hello, and welcome to Books from Your Therapist, a podcast where we talk to therapists and mental health practitioners about their mental health related book recommendations. By mixing book talk with mental health, we hope to open up the conversation around books your therapist may have suggested and to make them more accessible.
This podcast is not a substitute for mental health care. It's for educational and entertainment purposes only. I'm Amanda Throckmorton, a marriage and family therapist in California.
And I'm Tara Kremen, and I work in the book industry in Toronto, in Canada. In this episode, we're talking to Oona Metz, LICSW. The books we talk about are Oona's own book that just came out called Unhitched, the Essential Divorce Guide for Women, and Camouflage, How I Emerged from the Shadows of a Military Marriage by Heather Sweeney.
In Unhitched, nationally recognized divorce expert and therapist Oona Metz provides a compassionate yet practical roadmap through every stage of the divorce process. Filled with key takeaways, reassuring insights, and inclusive stories tailored for women in both heterosexual and LGBTQ plus relationships, Unhinged offers a reassuring guide to life before, during, and after divorce.
Camouflage is about a woman's journey from being overshadowed by her husband's military career to rediscovering her identity as a single mother entering a new stage in life. After camouflaging her identity to conform to the expected role of the supportive military spouse, Heather Sweeney emerged from the shadows of her husband's Navy career to rediscover herself. It was a wonderful book pairing. I always love when we talk to somebody that's written their book just because that is my bread and butter. So it was really nice to talk to Oona about the writing process a little bit and also just her 30-year experience working with women going through divorces and what led her to create this book. So it was a really great conversation and I thought the books paired super well.
Hello, Oona. Welcome to Books from Your Therapist.
Hi, it's so nice to be here. I've really been looking forward to this.
Well, we're so excited to talk to you today, and we were hoping we could just start with a little bit of an intro of who are you? Any parts of yourself, your identity you'd like to share with our listeners?
Sure, I am a therapist and I've been a therapist for about 30 years, and now I can also count myself as being an author. And I live in the Boston area, and I'm a parent and a step parent, and I'm really happy to be here today.
So 30 years practicing, I'm sure you've seen so many different waves of what's in and what's out in the psychology world, but I'm sort of curious what inspired you to become a therapist?
Interestingly, I was just talking about this earlier. I think in some ways I was an unpaid therapist from the time I was born until the time I went to graduate school, which was pretty much right after college. And I finally decided I wanted to be paid for my work. But it comes naturally to me. I love talking to people. I love listening to people. I love hearing people's stories. So it's a good fit for me.
Mm. And so with your book, you have worked a lot with divorce, and it makes me curious about who you sort of serve in your practice outside of now being an author. Like, who do you work with?
hmm As I said, I have been a therapist for 30 years, but about 15 years ago, I really started to specialize in working with women going through divorce. I started a divorce support group for women, and it filled up so quickly that I started two more. And all three of those groups meet weekly, and they've been all going for the last 15 years. So I've literally seen like hundreds of women through the process of divorce, and it's really a wonderful population to work with because there's so much change that's possible. That's not the only thing I do. I see individuals as well, and I do some supervision, and but that's a big focus of my work right now.
Wow, a group running for 15 years is quite a feat.
Yeah, three of them.
Wow. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
that's really amazing to hear. And we'll get more into it in your book, but it also seems like there has been such a need for specific support for women during divorce. So
Yes.
so nice to hear that like you've
Yeah.
you've found that and kind of plugged in a place that's really needed.
Absolutely. I got to the point a few years ago where I had a huge waiting list, like 60 people on a waiting list, which is Some people would say, what a great position to be in for a business owner. But for me, it was a terrible position to be in because I know how much women need support today. They don't want to wait. And so I started a training program. So I'm now training other therapists how to lead these groups, which has been really wonderful. And now they're happening across the country. So that's good.
Wow,
Mhm.
congratulations.
Mm. Thank you. Thank you.
And I'd love to learn about, because we're chatting about the book that you wrote today.
Yes.
So have you always been a writer? Was this something of an ambition? Because it sounds like you have your hands full with your practice. So writing a book is very impressive. So I'm curious about that.
Oh, thank you for asking. I was not a writer at all, actually, before I wrote this book. The writing kind of scared me a little bit. And when I had to write things for instance, if I was giving a presentation for a conference or something, I would often procrastinate until the very last minute. I come from a really creative family. And so I almost felt like, okay, well, they can be the creatives and I will just do something different. I'll get good grades in school and then I can be a therapist. That's like different than, although people say all the time, like being a therapist is very creative, but it feels different than the creative arts. So I never wrote a thing. I never published anything until the age of 55 when I finally decided I had so much useful information that was kind of jangling around my head about the emotional journey of divorce. And I finally decided I just have to write it down. Like I have to share this information with more people than just the people in my groups. It was so useful for the people in my groups, but I knew that it would be helpful for others too. So I literally just decided I have to write down every single thing that I'm thinking or feeling about this process of the group. The words just poured out of me. Like it was I felt like I was like had a virus or something, a writing virus. Like I couldn't stop. I was just like, here I go. So
I love that. And I always love hearing people trying new things at any age. I think it's so
mhm.
important to not feel stuck in anything that like you can
Yes.
just give it a go. And I think nothing is more terrifying than a blank page and you
Right.
filled it up. So well done.
Right. Right. Well, also the other thing that was happening is that my youngest child was going off to college. And so there was
Mm.
a little bit of it's possible, it's possible that this was also a way to kind of avoid the heartache of my youngest going off to college and what that all meant. I mean, it was a good way to distract myself from that. And it was also, after 30 years as a therapist, it's not that I learned everything. There's plenty of things I don't know about therapy, but I kind of had learned everything that I wanted to know about therapy. So this was a really exciting new project to be writing and learning how to write, and then publishing and learning how to publish, and then promoting and learning how to promote. So my brain has been happy.
Well, and such a gift too for all of us, right, who get to benefit from your years of experience, right?
Yeah,
All this knowledge that you hold, and now training others to sort of step in and also do this work is really a gift.
yeah, yeah. Thank you. I hope so. That is certainly the intention that I feel like I know it's going to help people and I just want to spread the word and help more people. And divorce is something we don't talk about enough. There's not enough places and spaces to talk about it, and there's still shame and stigma attached. So I think anytime we can provide space for conversation about it, like we're doing today, it's going to help reduce shame and stigma, and that's important work.
And just before we jump into talking about your book a bit more, is there anything else that you'd like to share about yourself professionally or personally?
I've been divorced twice, and I'm now in a wonderful relationship. No plans to be married again. Twice divorced is enough. And let's see, I've got two cats.
Nice.
One is very aloof and judgy, cat-like, and one is kind of very crazy and very scared and all the time. So, but they're good companions too.
Nice. What are their names?
Gracie is the aloof one, and Wasabi is the one who has always wide eyes and
Like they've just eaten some wasabi.
Yeah. Yes, yes, or they've just seen a ghost all the time.
Mm.
Why is that dish towel in the kitchen? Oh my God.
Well, let's jump into your book. I'm so excited to talk about it. So, your book that's just released, congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you.
What inspired you to write this book?
The inspiration really came from leading these divorce support groups and 3 groups every single week, and every week leaving the group and thinking, that was so important what that person said today, or that was so, it seemed like it really mattered when I said X, Y, Z. I started to write, I got a little notebook and I started to write down those things. And then, eventually there were just so many things I felt like I have to write this book. I have to write it.
Yeah, and you just sort of mentioned how it, poured out of you, and it makes me think of we covered Elizabeth Gilbert's Big Magic
Mm.
book one
Uh-huh.
time, and
Uh-huh.
just this creative flow that she talks about, and taking the knowledge you have and like really allowing yourself to sort of jump into that river, so to speak, and bring
Yeah.
it to us. So it's amazing to hear about. And can you just give us a little brief overview of what the book is for the listeners?
Absolutely. So it's really about the emotional journey of divorce. There are a lot of books out there that are about the financial part or the legal part or a very specific part of divorce, like affairs or narcissism or things like that. There really aren't very many books at all about the emotional journey that is just for women. So I really take you through from the very beginning all the way through post-divorce dating and a new identity, but we really start at the very, very beginning when somebody's making the decision to divorce or the decision is made for them, and then take them through each and every stage of the divorce with really kind of practical psychological tips. I use very plain language, so this is not a book that's written specifically for therapists. It's written for the general public, although I think therapists will find it very helpful. And I hope that they'll keep a copy in their office so that they can refer client. I mean, every therapist is going to have a client who walks in who's getting a divorce at some point or another. And I hope this can be the kind of the go-to book for them to hand to a client.
I'm hearing, a lot of support in books, or specifically maybe around financial or legal pieces in divorce, but why did you feel like it was important to write a divorce guide specifically for women in this?
The biggest reason is because that's been my experience.
Hmm.
The support groups that I run are for women. And so I didn't feel like I had the expertise to write for both the genders. And I do think there's some real differences between the experience of marriage and the experience of divorce for men and for women. And so I really wanted to focus on the experience for women.
You mentioned about how this book is broken down into sort of like different sections of like, I guess, the emotional journey through a divorce and even afterwards. But I'm curious if you can talk a little bit about like the writing process in how did you manage to tackle what is such a big subject into
Mm.
these more manageable sections where a reader can pick it up and just go to the part of the book that they need in that moment?
Yeah, that was one of the things that was really, I really enjoyed. I hired a writing coach who's brilliant. Her name is Katie Bannon, and she really helped me to think about the reader. Because I had all the knowledge in my head, but that's different than how the reader is going to incorporate that knowledge or take in that knowledge. And so we really spent a lot of time figuring out how to break down the sections and present the material in such a way that, just like you said, somebody can pick up the book and they're a parent and they want to know what to do about their children. They can skip all the other chapters and go straight to the chapter about kids and about parenting. There's a couple chapters about kids or parenting. Or they're struggling with the very beginning and they're not ready to move on to the rest. So they can just read the beginning and then save the rest for later. The other thing that we really thought a lot about was how isolated women feel and how alone they feel with their feelings. and with their stories. And so I really wanted to incorporate a lot of stories about other women who had been divorced. That's a little tricky as a therapist because I can't use any stories from my practice, right? Privacy and confidentiality is like the utmost priority for me. And so I wasn't going to use any stories directly from my practice. So what I did was I just made composites and I just thought about like the thousands of stories I've heard and kind of combined them all into a new person. So they're all based on real life, but nobody's going to be able to identify themselves. So the book really has a number of vignettes, shorter vignettes, and then longer vignettes in it so that people can feel like they can relate, that they're not alone, because I think that's one of the most important things. So it's almost like having a little support group in your pocket or in your earbuds, that you're reading about Sally who's going through a divorce and you're thinking, oh, wow, yeah, that's kind of like mine. Oh, yeah, I understand that. That's like mine. And then the other thing I did was I sprinkled in a bunch of exercises throughout the book so that people can really just take time to reflect on their own experience. And again, they can do that as they're reading, they can do that afterwards, they can skip those parts. It's really a book that's meant to be, people don't have to read it from page 1 to page 350. They can go back and forth or skip parts or find whatever's most useful to them.
I like that you're sort of highlighting this piece about the different stories, and it makes me think about being in a group, right?
Yes.
Where you're sitting in a room with people that are experiencing something similar, but all of their stories are so different, right? And just like the power of listening to another person's experiencing that and how there's access to that in the book, right? Like you don't need that physical group necessarily, like if you have this book, you can sort of read and be like, wow, that's so different than how I experience it.
hmm One of the things I found in leading these support groups that I really try to have come alive in the book is that every person's marriage and every person's divorce is unique. No two are the same. And yet there are so many feelings that are similar and so many feelings that people can relate to. And so in the book, in these longer vignettes that I have, the content of what exactly happened to that person might be very different than what happened to you or me. But the feelings that that person has are where people can really connect and relate.
I think the vignettes really help to reaffirm some of the things that you had been saying. It's like it's
Mhm.
you're as the non-therapist reading this, but I'm a child of divorce, so it was I could relate to some of it.
Yes, yes.
You're reading the sort of like more kind of therapy talk examples, but having
Yeah.
the real experience,
Mhm. Mhm.
it just sort of was like shining a light on it. You're sort of like, I'm ingesting this,
Yes,
but then this is really actually bringing it to life. That's what it felt
right.
like when I was reading it. But
Yes, yes. Good. I'm glad. That was the intent. That was the intent. It was
yeah.
also tricky because a lot of women going through divorce tell me that it's very hard for them to read. I think we know that when stress goes up, cognition goes down, right?
Hmm.
And I always reassure women when they tell me they can't read that your reading ability will come back to you. Don't worry, it will come back when you're less stressed. So then, how do you write a book for people who have a hard time reading, right? So that's why the book is really broken down into smaller sections and also why it's going to be an audiobook both because sometimes that's easier to take in than reading, and also sometimes for safety's sake. If somebody's considering divorce, but they don't want to put that book on their nightstand, they don't want their spouse to see it, or they don't want their kids to see it, even if their spouse has moved out, they can put it in their earbuds and just be anonymous. Nobody has to know they're listening.
Thank you for bringing that piece in, like the accessibility piece. I think about that a lot too
Mhm.
with grief and
Yes.
like, there's it these are books are such a great resource, but to your point, we don't always have access to that when we're in the middle of something. And yeah, naming the safety piece too of if someone's
Right.
considering, and doesn't want the book around physically
Mhm.
having that. So yeah, I think that's such an important piece. So I'm really glad that you brought it in.
You cover a kind of a wide variety of like different types of couples. And I'm just wondering, in your experience as you're kind of like 30 years working with divorce, are there ways that divorce shows up differently for like queer couples compared to like heterosexual couples going through divorce?
Great question. So it was very intentional on my part to include queer couples in this book because I think the LGBTQ community has been so excluded from so many things, from books about marriage and dating and divorce. There's very little about LGBTQ divorce out there. So I really wanted to make sure that that community was included. That was really important to me. You know, I haven't seen a ton of difference. I think it is true that some people in the queer community have less support from their families because of shame and stigma. I think there's certainly more pressure and more discrimination that they face. The good news is that I think related to that, they oftentimes have found their own chosen community or chosen family. So I find that a lot of the lesbians who have come through my groups have a really wonderful community already in place. They don't have to go out and find new community. They already have community. I think the biggest difference is less about sexuality and it's more about being a parent or not being a parent. I think it's
Mm.
really different to go through divorce when you have kids and you're supporting your kids through the divorce too, than to go through divorce when you don't have kids. So that to me is the biggest difference. And so when lesbian women have come to my group, if they have children, it's kind of the same, it's all the same feelings and same themes as the straight people in the group. I think it's when people don't have kids, whether they're straight or LGBTQ, that makes a little bit of a difference.
I can see that, of course, right? Because there's other people sort of involved in that relationship, and now you have created a child with this person, and there's going to be that connection. And it
Mhm.
makes me think about just, I've heard people say, like, well, at least you didn't have children together, right?
Mhm.
Which also can be kind of minimizing the pain of,
Right.
so it's,
Right,
yeah,
right, right. There's
yeah,
grief in that too. Right,
right,
right. There can be grief and relief if you don't have children and you
right,
get divorced, and grief and relief if you do have children and you get divorced, right? Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. And a lot of that depends on what the co-parenting relationship is. If it's amicable, then that's okay, and kids can do great. And if it's really conflictual, that's really hard on kids and really hard on the adults too.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
One thing that sort of, I think research shows that marriage benefits men more than women. Like we hear that
Hmm.
all the time. And
Yep.
in your book, you write, women grieve and men replace. Can
Hmm.
you say a little bit more about this?
Yeah, I mean, I do think one of the big differences in terms of marriage in heterosexual marriages for men and women is that marriage is really good for men. There's that Harvard research that shows that the improvements in finances and health and psychologically, how much they improve. And women, I think benefit from a healthy marriage, but they also get very busy. There's a real inequality still happening in so many heterosexual marriages where women are doing the bulk of the parenting and the home care still. And when men and women go through a divorce, there's kind of this saying in the divorce world that women grieve and men replace. Men oftentimes kind of go for working more often or a new relationship or, unfortunately, sometimes substances, a way to not feel. Those are all ways to not feel, right? And I think women are naturally kind of more equipped to talk about their feelings, have their feelings, do the work of grieving, which I think helps them to not repeat old patterns. Um, so that's what I've seen.
It also makes me think of just, and these, I'm just speaking generally, and for
Hmm.
heterosexual couples, like men not upholding their community in the same way that
Mm.
women do. And, we did a episode on friendship last year where we talked about just the different rings of intimacy and how women tend
Yes.
to keep more in their really
Yeah.
tight inner circle, whereas a man might feel as though he doesn't need as
Hmm.
many people around if he has a partner,
Right.
and even bringing it back to the schoolyard of, little boys tend to make
Hmm.
friends by competition and play, and girls will connect through talking, and
Yeah.
how as we age, if those activities for men are not there anymore, like how are they accessing friendships and stuff?
Right. And for parents, I think oftentimes moms really get together, when kids are young. So they're
Hmm.
already kind of naturally inclined towards social relationships. And then if they have children too, they're gathering with other moms or, in play groups or seeing the moms at drop off, or then they have that whole community of people too. I mean, if you ask a woman who her best friend is, she's going to tell you the name of somebody, right? It's Joan, it's Kristen, it's Heather, right? And if you ask a man who his best friend is, oftentimes he'll say, my wife, right? And so then in divorce, the woman has her community and the man oftentimes doesn't,
Right.
right?
And is it true that women initiate 70% of divorces in
Yes.
heterosexual couples?
Yes,
Wow.
yes, it is, which is surprising to some people. I have a theory about that and a framework I talk about, which is that I think that women do the work of keeping the marriage going, and they do the work of ending the marriage if it needs to be ended. And I think oftentimes when women initiate divorce, it's because their husbands have already left in some way, but they're still sitting on the couch, right? They've left through infidelity or through abuse of some kind or through passivity. They're not upholding their part of the marriage, but the marriage is still working for them. So they're not going to be the ones to call the divorce lawyer. And that concept really helps when women come to me and they feel so guilty about initiating divorce. And when that happens, I say to them, like, let's think about your marriage. Like, have you been doing everything you could to improve your marriage? Well, yes, I have. And what has your husband been doing? Not much, right? So, like, who left the marriage originally? Yes,
Mm.
yes, you had to end it. You had to initiate this, but he left a long time ago. And that helps, I think, to reduce the feelings of guilt.
Yeah, it really it stuck out to me that there's a line in your book that like just as you're talking about like the person who does the work in the divorce is the same person who did the work in the marriage. And like I think
Yes,
with your example, it's the woman is not the person that wants the divorce, but then the
right,
partner drags their feet and like
right.
but having it written out like that, you're like, oh, of course it would be the same person.
Mhm.
But I was so mad on that woman's behalf. I was like, can you speak a little bit about this?
I know because, so many times also women have come to me who did not initiate their divorce. Like their husband said, okay, I'm out of here. I want a divorce. But then they don't do the work. There's so much work involved in a divorce. You have to fill out a lot of paperwork. You have to contact the lawyer. You have to, provide your financial documents, and they just don't do it. And so the woman is like, well, wait a second. I thought you wanted a divorce, but why aren't you doing the steps necessary? And so I see that all the time. And I say to them, well, who did the steps necessary in your marriage? And they'll say, I did. I did everything. And well, that's what's going to happen in the divorce. Like,
Oh my God,
so,
I'm just like just furious about about that whole idea. Like that's
right,
so
right.
maddening. Like, but
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
especially
yeah.
if it's something because I think your book kind of puts a little bit of emphasis on because you talk about like the after divorce as well, but like the process can be long, but it is worth it because you're going to get to this point where you're going to move beyond being
Yes,
tied to this person in like this
right.
legal marriage way, and that the end goal will be worth however long or however
Mhm.
hard that is.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's really the way that I see divorce is that it's always heartbreaking and stressful and horrible to go through in the beginning. And it also can really create these incredible opportunities for growth and healing and transformation if people do the work of the grief work. It can really lead to people having kind of a second chapter or third chapter.
Mm.
It's an ending and it's a beginning too. It's hard to see that when you're in the middle of it or in the beginning of it. It's very hard to see that, but I've seen it happen so many times.
And in your book, you really highlight, and even as we're speaking now, like the need for support and community for someone that's going through a divorce. If someone's listening to this and they're feeling isolated, what advice would you give to them?
I definitely think it's so important for people to reach out and find community, whether it's with a therapist or a support group or an online support group. Also, that we have divorce coaches now. I mean, there's so many avenues of support, and some of them are expensive, but some of them are free. I have a ton of free resources
Mm.
on my website. I link people to free support groups and things like that. So, it's so important to find community and to find other women who are going through divorce or who have gone through divorce to get it. Because I think so often, like people have really well-meaning friends and family who want to support and want to help, but if they haven't been through a divorce, they don't really get it in the same way. And that can be hard. So I think finding those people is really important.
And what do you hope that readers take away in general overall from this book?
I hope that they don't feel alone. I mean, that was one of the major things that one of the major reasons I wanted to write this book. I don't want people to feel alone. I want them to feel less shame. I want them to feel less stigma. And I want them to feel hope that they are going through something that's really hard, but that eventually there will be better times on the other side.
Well, thank you for writing it. I'm sure people will find it beneficial. It seems like such
Mm.
a great resource to have.
Yeah, thank you so much. I hope so.
So let's move on to our second book, which is the book of your choosing, and you picked Camouflage by Heather Sweeney. So maybe you could tell us why you picked this book.
I would love to. One of the cool things about becoming a writer this late in life is that I got to meet other writers, and Heather was somebody I had admired from afar and her writing. And when I saw that she was writing a book, I called her up and said, "Oh my God, I'm writing a book too, and we should talk." And so we have become friends. And one of the reasons I picked her book was because her book is about being married to a man who's in the military and then getting divorced from this man. And I don't have any experience at all with the military. I don't know anything about it other than just, maybe reading a little bit about it in the media or whatever. None of my family members have ever been in the military. So I didn't really know anything about it. So I wanted to learn more. And so that's why I picked her book. And one of the things I really liked was learning more about it.
Yeah, it definitely was giving a view into an area that I didn't have too much
Yeah.
experience with either. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. That's really interesting.
I loved from a literary point of view that at the beginning of the book, it begins with a note about memory being subjective and that this is
Mhm,
Heather's account. And just as like a modern memoir, like that struck out to
mhm.
me from just like the book point of things. And I'm
Yes.
just wondering what you thought about that.
I loved that she said that because I think memory is a subjective and she's telling one story, right? And there's hundreds of other stories about that time period from everybody who was involved, right? And so she's owning that this is my story and memory is never perfect. So she's just putting that right up front,
Yeah, I
right?
thought it was great.
Yeah. Maggie Smith has this wonderful memoir called You Could Make This Place Beautiful. And in the beginning of that, she says, this is not a tell-all. This is a tell mine.
Mm.
And I love that. It's kind of similar to Heather's book, you know. She's owning this is my story and my story only.
Especially when you're thinking about memoirs as literature as well, because they're not quite
Yes.
fiction, but there is room for you
Mhm.
to use language in a way that's not a direct telling of, and then this
Right.
happened.
Right. It would
Yeah,
be pretty boring to read a book.
exactly.
And then the next day, this exact thing happened. And then the next day, this thing happened. Right, right, right. Yeah, it's good to have a little bit of license there.
Similar to what you were just kind of touching on of the military being out of a lived experience. And it makes me think about how I see the in the media military spouses portrayed, and it's always like the military person is centered, and then
Mhm.
the spouse is sort of the side character, right? And which is I think reading her book and have him be not the focal point
Yes.
was just a really nice perspective. And it also, it seemed impossible for her to ever be the focal point in that relationship. What are your thoughts on like how women compromise themselves in relationships?
I think that a lot of women that I see say to me, in my marriage, I became small. And I think that's what happened with Heather too, is that she was kind of in this situation where she had to become small to fit in a way. And the military is a real, that's like a structured way for you for you to become small if you're
Mhm.
the military spouse, right? I mean, if you're the person who's in the military, no, but if you're the spouse of a military person, it's set up in that way that, she couldn't count on her spouse being there at any point in time. Like the way that it's so crazy that you have to get deployed at any moment. And then, oh, they just change it at the last minute. And then maybe it's going to be this month, maybe it's going to be next month. We don't know. And then now you have to move. So you can never really put down roots in a way. And you're always beholden to not only just your spouse, but the military. I mean, it's not that he was making those decisions. He was deciding to be in the military, but the military was really deciding most of the time where their whole family was going and when. It's not like, oh, well, what's a convenient time for you? You're leaving now. Oh, no, now you're not leaving. Yes, you are. No, you're not. Yes, you are. I mean, yeah, so that kind of upheaval I can't imagine how difficult that must be.
And they got together before he was in the military, right? So this isn't
Right,
something that she initially signed on for.
right, right. And even when she did sign on, she didn't know what it
Right.
was going to be like. Right. She wanted to support him, which is great. She was very supportive, and this was a dream of his. And so she wanted to support his dream, which is great in marriage, until she realized that it would be really how hard it would be on her dreams.
I
Right.
don't think her dreams even came into it. Like it
Right.
didn't seem to be part of the conversation.
Right. Well, she
Yeah.
did go off and get her teaching degree during that time, during the
Yeah.
marriage, and she did become a writer. She
Yeah, yeah,
became more
yeah.
of a writer, which was great. But yeah, she had to really
Something that she really had to like seek herself and like carve into in addition to this like military spouse role. Like, yeah.
exactly. Yeah. And I also thought it was interesting too about how he would be deployed so often, and then her assumption that when he came back, they could just kind of start being a couple again and it would be wonderful, but that there was this whole time after deployment, post deployment, that was
Mhm.
like they had to really readjust to each other. He had to readjust, she had to readjust. And so there's like the time before the deployment, the time of the deployment, and then the time afterwards too. So it takes up so much time that they're not just being together in a normal way.
And not to mention, and I don't think that this needed to be centered because this is her experience, but potentially the trauma that he was
Yes,
experiencing while by being deployed, right?
absolutely.
And not having a lot of I
Hmm.
don't know, like consistent mental health services for
Right.
servicemen and women when they return.
Absolutely. I mean, both his trauma of what he was going through and then her trauma of wondering what he was going through. There was that one incident in there where she was really nervous and upset until she heard from him. Watching on the news, something's going down where your spouse is, that must be just terrifying, terrifying. And the ways in which trauma impacts relationships when he gets
Hmm.
home.
And on the mental health side of like the military as well, I think they talk about they've
Mhm.
tried like marriage counseling or marriage therapy, but it was
Yep.
quite stigmatized and very
Yes.
much, you're doing it on the sly and it's to support the
Hmm.
person in the military. And
Yes.
that was really, I couldn't imagine how difficult that must be.
Yes. Right. Right. Yeah, it felt like the marital therapy was really about supporting the military rather than supporting the
Yeah.
couple.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, as I was reading, I could feel myself like internally tightening because I'm like, yes, she went and got her teaching credential,
Hmm.
but because they have to move so much, she's not in a position where she can set up and start earning her own money. So, like, all my insights were like, no, like,
Oh,
do not become financially dependent
yes.
on this person, right? Like, there
Right.
just seems like there's so many structures in place to make a military spouse become more and more like disempowered and disenfranchised because there's
Yes.
so much dependency on this like the military being the third in the marriage.
Yes. Yep. Yep. Absolutely. I mean, that's a big piece of divorce, right?
Right.
Is like, do you have the finances,
Hmm.
right? I mean, we can all talk about the emotional piece, but there is a very real piece too of like financially, it can be devastating. And if you don't have your own income, it's really hard,
Yeah.
really hard.
Another thing that stood out in this book to me was how many divorce conversations they had. And,
Mm,
I sometimes you hear like, don't throw around the D word, right? Like
mhm,
you don't
mhm.
flirt with that word within a relationship, right?
Right.
And it just made me think about there were so many conversations and then the action would kind of fizzle out. Is this a
Right.
common pattern that you've seen for couples who are moving towards divorce?
Sometimes, yes. I mean, I think couples therapist would absolutely agree with you. Like, don't throw around the divorce word or that's it, I'm out of here word. I think what resonated for me is how long people think about divorce. I
Mm-hmm.
think and they were thinking about it out loud. Oftentimes, people think about it silently for
Right.
years before
Mm-hmm.
they actually initiate divorce. I mean, they didn't have that many conversations. They talked about divorce, but it didn't sound like there were big conversations that happened, and they were mostly one-offs, right, that happened. But you can see that was part of the book of kind of building. I thought she was such a great writer of like
Hmm.
building and building. It kept me going like I wanted to know what's going to happen, even though we kind of knew what was going to happen. In the end, you still wanted to follow it. You wanted to see, like, well, what's next? What happened? They had the fifth divorce conversation. Is that going to be the one that does it or not? And I think she also was pretty clear that maybe they would have gotten divorced if he wasn't away all the time,
Hmm.
but they had to kind of keep readjusting to each other. And then there's a deployment coming, so we're not going to talk about divorce then. And then he comes back, and then it's better for a while, so let's not talk about divorce then. And then, so it kind of kept them on this kind of roller coaster, right? Of yes, no, maybe we should, maybe we shouldn't. But I do think that people, especially women, really think about divorce for a very long time before being able to make it happen.
I thought these books worked very well as a pairing together.
Mhm.
Your book offers advice to women who may have lost like a sense of identity after their divorce. And
Mhm.
Heather in this book struggles with no longer being like the military spouse. So
Mhm.
just wondering if you have advice for anyone that's trying to regain their sense of self after losing that title of being a wife.
I mean, one of the things that you lose during divorce is your identity as a married person, which is an identity for a lot of
Mm-hmm.
people. I think even more importantly for many people is the identity of being part of an intact family,
Mm.
right? Or the identity of being a parent who sees their kids every day. Like that's an identity too. And so divorce offers an opportunity amongst all this loss to have a new kind of identity, and to reinvent yourself in a way. And I think specifically for women, women are so socialized and so good at taking care of everybody else's needs, right? They're so good at taking care of spouses and kids and bosses and everybody else. And thinking about what they need and what they want often comes last in line. And so there is an opportunity in divorce to really think again about what it is. What do you want in life? What do you need? What do you like? What do you dislike? And, I have some exercises in the book to help people kind of drill down into those things because oftentimes I have 55-year-old women who come to me, they've been married for 30 years, and they say, I feel like I'm 25 again. I feel like I'm back to this earlier age, and that's an age where they're creating identity. And how do you create now a new identity without your spouse, right? And sometimes I will say to women, like, here's an exercise for you. Go to the grocery store and walk slowly down the aisles. And I really want you to pay attention to, like, what food do you like? Because they're so used to shopping for their family, right? But
Yeah.
like, what's the food that you really like that you never get because other people don't like it, or other people are going to eat it before you get a chance, or, whatever. It's not on the meal plan, right? So what do you like? And that's a great eye-opening experience. And it seems so simple, and yet I think it's a great metaphor for thinking about what is it, I also tell people, like, if you don't have a lot of money to spend, like, that's okay. Change your bedding.
Mm.
Go get the bedding that you love the most, right? And if you've got a little extra money, like, paint your walls. What's your favorite color? I bet
Hmm.
it's not the color that's on your walls right now, right? So go paint your walls your favorite color, get your favorite bedding, like, go for it, right?
It's almost like Heather read your book already because she goes out
Yeah.
and buys her red towels.
Yes, yes, yes. That's exactly right. That's exactly
Yeah.
right. I also thought the coolest thing about, not the coolest thing, one really cool thing about Heather's book was that her blog that she started was called The Roller Coaster.
Mm.
And the model of grief that I developed in my book, the second stage is the roller coaster. And when I read that her blog was called The Roller Coaster, I was like, oh my God, look at that. That's so cool.
Wow.
Because we had no idea, of
Yeah.
each other until I read her book, and I mean, she'll soon be reading my book. So yeah.
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 Wow.
Yeah. Yeah.
Anything else that we haven't covered about this book that inspires you?
Again, like the reason I wrote the vignettes in my book, I just think for so many people who read Camouflage, even if they are not in a military divorce, I think for people getting divorced who have felt small in their marriages, it's a great book to read. And I think for people who are not getting divorced, but who are in the military, are married to a military person, I think it would be a great book to read. So I think it shouldn't be pigeonholed as just a book for people who are going through divorce who are married to a military person, because there's so much in there that I was able to relate to, and I think my clients could relate to, never having been part of the military. So,
Well, thank you so much for chatting with us today. And, congratulations on your book coming out just this week. Where can
yes.
people find you online?
My website is oonametz.com. I have a ton of free resources on my website for legal, financial resources, mental health resources, podcasts, articles. It's all free. You don't have to put in your email to receive it. I'm on Instagram. I would love for you to follow me there. I'm on LinkedIn. And my book is available. I hope you'll go to your local independent bookstore and buy it. And if you don't have a local independent bookstore, you can go to bookshop.org, which will ship it to you from a local bookstore. It's also on Amazon, but I hope you'll go to your local bookstore and support them. They need you. We need them to stay alive.
Definitely. Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been really a pleasure. I've been looking forward to this for a while.
Thanks for listening to Books from Your Therapist. If you're interested in the books we talked about, we'll include links in our show notes. If you'd like to reach out to us with your own recommendations, or a mental health practitioner or author interested in coming on to share, you can email us at booksfromyourtherapist@gmail.com.
If you're in California and interested in working with Amanda, you can find her at amandathrockmorton.com. And you can follow us on socials. We are at Books From Your Therapist on Instagram, Threads, and TikTok. And if you're curious, you can follow me on Substack at Tara Kremen.
Happy searching for and leaning into your community if you are feeling isolated.
Happy finding your sense of self again.